Welcome back to our Elul reflections for 2024. This is a guided journey 3 times a week through the month of Elul as we prepare ourselves for Rosh Hashanah. And we're getting very close now that we've had the full moon. The moon gets smaller as we prepare ourselves in the final couple of weeks for our services and particularly for that spiritual change, that transformation. 3 times a week during this month, I've been sharing readings from this wonderful book, Enter These Gates, Meditations for the Days of War by Alden Solovy, which I really do recommend, and I do recommend listening to my interview with him on my Soul Searching podcast. Today's reading is, I think, a bit of a challenging reading. It's called Forgiving God. It is not in my power to forgive God for the pains and heartbreaks suffered in my life, or the traumas suffered in the world, for war and destruction, for plague and terror, for brutality and evil. It is not in my power to pardon God for all that is callous or indifferent, for all that is heartless or unkind, for all that is baseless or random, for all that is violent or cruel, for all that appears unwanted, unbidden, without hope or blessing. God's ways are hidden. God's judgments are secret. God's plan is veiled. When I accept that I cannot conceive of God's designs, I surrender into the mystery of life. Only then can I forgive myself. This is an interesting and challenging reading. It reminds me of the old story of the tailor, the poor tailor, who was praying on Yom Kippur and turns to God and says, "Dear God, yes, I may have committed some sins during the year. I may have cut cloth a little generously towards me. I may not have given my customers all the best deals. I may have taken advantage of them. But those sins are insignificant compared to your sins, O God, the sins of the poor and the hungry, the starving children, cruelty and so much pain in the world. So," says the tailor to God in his prayer, "so let's make a deal. I will forgive you if you forgive me." And he shares his thoughts with the rabbi, and the rabbi turns to him and says, "You fool, you had the chance to make a deal that would have redeemed the entire world." And I think that's a really interesting and important story, because the idea of blaming God, that God's sins are so numerous, so many, that why would we even pray? And if God has committed so many wrongs, why do we say, well, I've done wrong because your wrongs are so much more? So to the point that we could have turned around and said, "Dear God, here's the deal. We'll forgive you of all your sins if you redeem the whole of humanity and bring an end to pain and suffering." The converse of that is the book of Job, which is a really extraordinary, important book of the Bible, in which a totally righteous man suffers as a result of an interesting deal, trade, bet between God and the opposing angel, and to see if Job will curse God, to see if Job will blame God, or will turn around and talk negatively, essentially, about God. And so all these terrible, terrible things happen to Job, who is totally innocent. And they happen just because, for no reason of Job's. And all of Job's companions turn around and say, "You must have done something wrong, you deserve this." And Job continually throughout the book says, "I didn't. I'm an innocent man." And he refuses to curse God, until God appears at the end of the book and says exactly what Alden Solovy says here, essentially. God's ways are hidden, God's judgments are secret, God's plan is veiled. In other words, God says, "Who are you? Were you there when I created the universe? Were you there when I laid the foundations of everything? No, you don't understand. And since you don't understand, don't judge me. There's a challenge here. And for me, this is very challenging. This is, of course, an extremely anthropomorphic God. This is a God who sits outside the world, who turns around and says, I want you to know me as I can know you, but you can only know me so far. And that does make sense, the idea, as I shared in High Holy Day sermons in the past, using Rudolf Otto's phrase of God as the mysterium tremendum. As we get closer to God, we get closer to non-existence, to not human existence, which in our experience means death. And so drawing close to God risks danger. And we see this throughout the Bible in various stories. For example, those who put their hand on the ark and are killed immediately. So we can't know God and we can't know God's ways, but that seems to leave us, for those who believe in an anthropomorphic God, that seems to leave us with this discontent of, well, then why do bad things happen? It seems unfair. And I think for me, the challenge here, when I accept, as Alden Solovy writes, when I accept that I cannot conceive of God's designs, I surrender into the mystery of life. Only then can I forgive myself. I'm not sure if I'm there. And this is one reading where I think I just disagree with this. I think it's possible to forgive oneself, which is extremely important before we engage in teshuvah, to say, I'm not defined by this negative behavior. I can be better. I can change. I can improve. I don't think I need to find the mystery of God or to do that. I don't think I need to turn around and say the whole world is unknowable, therefore I forgive myself. For me, forgiveness of self is a gift to myself and a gift to others. It's letting go of the past and saying who I was then is different to who I am now. It's really extraordinary when we look in, especially in the world of politics, but also entertainment, when people say things and then change their minds. And people often jump on them and say, but you said this however many years ago. And the response should be, yes, and now I've learned and grown, and I have new experiences, and they have shaped me, and so my position on something has changed. Or I may have said something bad in the past, and I regret that, but that was me back in the past, and now I believe something else. We've all done it. I remember certain statements that I made when I was much younger that embarrass me, that I'm glad that other people don't know about, because that was then and this is now, and I have experience and I've learned and grown. So I've been able to forgive myself with the passage of time, not with looking at the world around us and saying, well, I don't understand how any of this works. I don't understand how any of this is just. So therefore, I surrender into the mystery of life in order to forgive myself. Because for me, it's not about the mystery of life, although life is mysterious. And when I look at some of this, some of the earlier writing here, it's not in my power to forgive God for the traumas suffered in the world, for war and destruction, for plague and terror, for brutality and evil. Most of that comes from us, not from God. God doesn't commit war, we commit war. God doesn't destroy, we destroy. We've created a society which destroys itself, an ecocidal society which is destroying the planet which was given to us. That's not God. God created the world and said, here are the parameters of life. Here's the way to live carefully on this earth, gently, lovingly with the earth and with each other. And if we choose not to do that, I don't think it's appropriate to turn around and blame God. He says it's not in my power to pardon God for all that is callous or indifferent, heartless, unkind, baseless, random, violent, or cruel. And I think that for me shows, again, a particular kind of theology. A theology of a good God who sits above, who sits separate. And this God is influenced by millennia of other theologies, particularly Greek theology. The idea that God is all good, all-knowing, and all-powerful. And that's not necessarily where the Jewish God is, where the Hebrew God is. The God of the Bible doesn't seem to be all-knowing in terms of knowing the future, because God regrets performing certain actions. God regrets before the flood, for example, of making humanity. If God were all-knowing and knew the future, why would God regret anything? Because God would surely know what was happening. So I think, for me, even though I may not agree with this reading, I wanted to share it because it brings out two things. Firstly, which I think are really important for the High Holy Days. Firstly, it brings out what is my understanding of God? Who is God to me? Is God within? Is God outside? Is God immanent or transcendent? Is God, as Mordechai Kaplan said, is God the power that makes for salvation? Is God, like Buber, to be encountered but not defined? Who is God to me? Because if we are engaging in teshuvah, in return to our truest self, and in return to God, we need to know who God is to me. That's the first question. The second question that comes from this reading is, what do I need in order to forgive myself? What do I need in order to forgive myself? Do I need the forgiveness of others? Do I need to surrender into the mystery of life? What is it that I need in order to forgive myself? Because if we cannot forgive ourselves, then we can never move forward into teshuvah. So I hope that this reading for this Shabbat helps you reflect on the question, who is God to me? And as I prepare for Rosh Hashanah, how might I forgive myself? The shofar is traditionally blown during the month of Elul. The blessing is Lishmoa Kol Shofar. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu Lishmoa Kol Shofar. I do hope that you'll be able to join us in services this evening. I'll be sitting at the back with my kids so that we may say Kaddish and be together as a family because of the bereavement in our family. Our service will be led by Aaron and Fred, so it's going to be wonderful and musical and sensitive and caring and thoughtful. So I do encourage you to join us for that. Tomorrow morning, our Torah study is not Torah study, it's Elul preparation. And what we're going to do, and I'm going to be leading that, is we're going to be looking at some of the Elul reflections that I have shared so far. And we'll be talking about them and how they resonate for us. And some of the answers to the questions that I've posed will be shared by people who are at that discussion. And then I, of course, also invite you to join us for our Shabbat Shacharit service in the morning afterwards. I hope that for this Shabbat, you're able to use this reading today to reflect on who is God to me and what do I need to forgive myself. And if you want, please feel free on YouTube to put your answers in the comments, or if you want something a bit more private and want to share it with me, please, of course, feel free to reach out and share your answers with me, or join us even tomorrow for Torah study and share your answers then. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.